The look on Karen's face when I told her she was trespassing on my private lake was worth every legal fees that followed. Picture this, I'm standing on my dock pointing at fresh no trespassing signs while HOA President Brenda Hutchinson turns ghost white. Her pontoon boat motor sputters to silence. The smell of lake water and sunscreen hangs heavy in the July air. 20 neighbors watch from the shore as Brenda realizes she's been harassing the actual landowner for months. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about lake access. Brenda had been planning to hit our community with $2.3 million in assessments using fake shared waterfront rights. She thought she'd found the perfect mark when I inherited this property. Boy, was she wrong. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your private property right in front of your guests? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet your HOA has tried something just as outrageous. Let me back up and tell you how I accidentally became the target of the most elaborate property scam I've ever seen. My name's Marcus Thornfield, and 6 months ago I was living a completely different life in Phoenix. Recently divorced, burned out from my civil engineering job, and honestly questioning every life choice I'd made since college. Then I got the call that changed everything. My grandfather, Ezra, had passed away, leaving me his entire lakefront estate in Millbrook, Wisconsin. Now, Grandpa Ezra wasn't just any property owner. This man was basically the unofficial mayor of Crystal Lake. He owned 847 acres, including 2.3 millimeters of pristine shoreline. And for 60 years, he'd been the town's beloved lake guardian. Free fish fries every summer, kids learning to swim in his cove, neighbors borrowing boats without asking. Grandpa treated that lake like a community resource. I spent every childhood summer here learning about water rights while dock planks creaked under my feet, and the scent of pine needles mixed with whatever fish Uncle Jim was cleaning at the dock. The property was incredible. Main house, guest cabins, boat launch, even the crumbling foundation of an 1890s mill that Grandpa always promised to restore next summer. That's when I met Brenda Hutchinson. And folks, this woman was a piece of work. Picture this, 52 years old, self-appointed Millbrook Shores Community Standards Director, a title that sounds official until you realize she made it up herself. She'd moved from Minneapolis suburbs 3 years earlier on a mission to elevate community standards, which apparently meant micromanaging everyone's mailbox height and deck stain color. Always in tennis whites, despite never holding a racket, driving a white BMW SUV with community first vanity plates. She had that special energy of someone who discovered the intoxicating power of HOA authority. She showed up exactly 1 week after I arrived, clipboard in hand, and that shark smile that screamed, "I'm about to ruin your day." "We need to discuss your grandfather's informal arrangements with the community," she announced, standing in my doorway like she owned the place. The sound of papers rustling mixed with her perfume. The kind that costs $200 an ounce and smells like it's trying to cover up something rotten. Here's where it gets good. Brenda whips out this 47-page community lake usage agreement requiring a $12,000 annual maintenance fee. She claimed lake access had been an implied easement that needed proper documentation now that ownership transferred to an outsider. The way she said outsider made it clear she'd already decided I was the enemy. "Your grandfather was very cooperative with community needs," she purred. "I'm sure you'll want to continue that tradition." I politely declined, mentioning I was still reviewing Grandpa's documents. Her smile could have frozen the lake in July. The following weekend, I hosted a barbecue for 8 college friends, my first attempt at recreating those legendary gatherings Grandpa used to throw. We're having a blast until 2 p.m. when Hurricane Brenda storms onto my dock with laminated violation notices. "Sir, this community has standards," she declared, demanding a guest list like she was running border patrol. "Your grandfather understood appropriate boundaries. The smell of grilling burgers couldn't mask the awkward tension as my friends started packing up. Party over." Thanks to the self-appointed lake police that evening, feeling like I'd somehow failed Grandpa's memory, I decided to explore his study more thoroughly. Behind a bookshelf, I found a hidden panel because apparently my grandfather was part librarian, part secret agent. Inside a cedar chest were original land deeds, surveyor maps, and water rights documentation dating back to the 1920s. One document made me grin like an idiot. Crystal Lake Water Rights Grant 1923, signed, notarized, filed with the county, granting my family exclusive ownership of the entire lake. You know what I learned from my engineering background? When someone makes claims about your property rights, the county courthouse records don't lie. Everything else is just hot air and wishful thinking. Brenda had been running a protection racket on property she didn't own, couldn't control, and had zero legal authority over. I realized I wasn't dealing with an overzealous neighbor. I was dealing with a con artist, and she just picked the wrong mark. Monday morning hit me like a slap in the face, literally. I walked out to my truck and found an official-looking cease and desist letter shoved under my windshield wiper, the edges flapping in the morning breeze like a surrender flag. Except I wasn't the one surrendering. The document looked impressive at first glance. All fancy letterhead and legal-sounding language claiming the Millbrook Shores Homeowners Association had exclusive recreational rights to my waterfront. It threatened 500 daily fines for unauthorized lake usage and was signed by something called Community Legal Services. The smell of fresh ink and desperation was practically wafting off the paper. Here's the thing though, and this is where my engineering training kicked in. I spent 10 minutes examining that letterhead and realized it was faker than Brenda's community authority. No legitimate law firm uses a P.O. box as their only address, and Community Legal Services sounded about as official as definitely not a scam incorporated. But Brenda's little power play got me curious about what story she had been selling the neighbors. So I decided to do some detective work. First stop, Mrs. Dorothy Kowalski, 78 years old and sharp as a tack, who'd lived next door since the Carter administration. Brenda showed up like a tornado, Dorothy told me over coffee that tasted strong enough to strip paint. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls and righteous indignation. Your grandpa never charged nobody nothing for 60 years. Then suddenly this woman appears talking about proper management and community standards. Next I visited Jim Brennan, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down. Jim dropped the real bombshell. Brenda had been collecting $200 monthly lake fees from 23 families for over 2 years. That's nearly $5,000 a month, folks, for doing absolutely nothing except printing fake invoices. The Hendersons, a young family who'd moved here for affordable lakefront living, were now paying $2,400 yearly to Brenda for the privilege of using what they thought was community property. Their kids were asking why they had to pay to swim when old Mr. Thornfield never charged anyone. Time for a trip to the county courthouse where I spent the evening with Clerk Sandra, a woman who knew property records like I knew engineering specs. The musty smell of old record books mixed with the mechanical churning of the copy machine as we dug into the truth. Discovery number 1, no HOA had ever been legally filed for Millbrook Shores. Zero paperwork, no registration, no legal standing whatsoever. Discovery number 2, Brenda's house deed showed a standard residential lot with exactly 0 water rights. She owned her driveway and backyard, period. Discovery number 3, Grandpa's 1963 property survey clearly showed private ownership of the entire lake, right down to the water line. I was feeling pretty good about my research when Thursday arrived with a knock on my door. Sheriff's Deputy Carson stood there looking uncomfortable, hat in hand. "Sir, I've got a complaint filed against you for harassment and property destruction," he said, consulting his notepad. "Lady claims you vandalized the community bulletin board and threatened residents." I had to laugh. "Deputy, the only thing I've destroyed is Brenda's fantasy about owning my lake. Want to see the actual property deeds?" His eyebrows shot up as I spread the courthouse documents across my kitchen table. The look on his face was priceless, like watching someone realize they've been trying to arrest the homeowner for trespassing in their own house. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "She never mentioned you actually owned the lake." We drove over to Brenda's house together, where she was watering her petunias in full tennis regalia. Confident smirk plastered across her face. That smirk started melting faster than ice cream in August when Deputy Carson began explaining property law basics. "Ma'am, seems like there might be some confusion about who owns what around here," he said diplomatically. "There must be some mistake," Brenda stammered, the water hose hitting concrete with sharp splashes. The smell of fertilizer and fresh mulch couldn't mask her growing panic. "The community has always shared lake access." You're absolutely right, Mrs. Hutchinson, I said, keeping my voice pleasant and reasonable. My family has shared it freely for generations, but collecting fees for property you don't own, that's not sharing, that's theft. Word traveled through Millbrook faster than gossip at a church potluck. 3 families stopped paying Brenda's lake fees immediately. The hardware store owner started mentioning the property dispute to every customer. Jim Brennan offered to help me research HOA formation laws. Bless his heart, but Brenda wasn't done. Friday evening brought another final notice taped to my door, this time claiming Grandpa had signed some mystical verbal agreement witnessed by community elders. She threatened to file a lawsuit for breach of community covenant, which was impressive considering no covenant existed. That's when I realized gentle correction wasn't going to work. Brenda was doubling down on crazy, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. Tuesday morning brought a new level of audacity that honestly impressed me. I found a colorful flyer in my mailbox advertising a community meeting for Thursday at 7 p.m. Topic: waterfront access rights and safety concerns. The flyer listed Brenda as Millbrook Shores HOA president with credentials that would make a used car salesman blush. Here's the kicker. 34 households received invitations, but somehow mine got lost in the mail. Funny how that works. Dorothy called me that afternoon, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. That woman's been going door to door with some bull story about you planning to fence off the entire shoreline, she said. Claims you're from out of state and don't understand local customs. Jim Brennan reported even juicier gossip. Brenda was telling newer residents I plan to charge admission fees and ban children from swimming. The Henderson family actually approached me at the grocery store, their 8-year-old daughter clutching my sleeve with tears in her eyes. "Are you really going to keep us from swimming, Mr. Marcus?" she asked, and my heart just about broke. This was psychological warfare, and Brenda was using kids as ammunition. Time for some intelligence gathering of my own. I visited Millbrook Township office to research community meeting permits. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman who'd probably seen every scam in the book, shook her head when I described Brenda's activities. No permit filed, no legal HOA registration, no insurance coverage, she confirmed. If she's collecting money and holding official meetings, someone should report this to the state attorney general. The smell of bureaucratic coffee and photocopier toner filled the air as she handed me copies of property records for surrounding lots. Plot twist. 3 other families actually owned their own shoreline sections too. Brenda had been scamming people who didn't even need her permission to access the water. Thursday evening arrived, and I decided to crash Brenda's little propaganda session. The community center was packed. 40-plus residents squeezed into folding chairs, coffee and donuts on card tables, and Brenda standing at the front with a PowerPoint presentation like she was running a corporate board meeting. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, while the smell of burnt coffee mixed with nervous energy. Brenda clicked through slides showing overcrowded lake conditions, which were just photos from my barbecue, and warned about liability issues and property value decline. Without professional management, she declared, we're one accident away from lawsuits that could bankrupt this entire community. I waited until she finished her 20-minute fear-mongering presentation before standing up during the Q&A session. "Mrs. Hutchinson, fascinating presentation," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Could you explain which legal authority granted you lake management rights?" You could hear a pin drop. Brenda's face went through more color changes than a mood ring. "Well, your grandfather's verbal agreements and community traditions," she stammered. That's when I pulled out my folder of courthouse records and started passing copies to the front row. The rustling of papers sounded like autumn leaves as people examined the evidence. "These are the original 1923 water rights grants," I announced. "They cover the entire lake. 3 other families here also own their shoreline sections. None of us granted anyone management authority." The murmur started low and built like distant thunder. Several residents were checking their own property deeds on their phones, probably for the first time in years. Brenda tried to pivot, claiming my documents were outdated and that modern community standards override historical property rights. Then she made her fatal mistake, mentioning she'd already deposited $200 in the community lake maintenance account. "So, you've been collecting money for services on property you don't own or control?" I asked sweetly. That's when the dam burst. The Henderson family stood up. "Wait, we've been paying for what exactly?" "Jim Brennan." "Brenda, you told us this was legally required." Dorothy's voice cut through the chaos. Ezra Thornfield never charged nobody a penny in 60 years. Brenda grabbed her laptop and made a hasty exit, shouting something about legal counsel being in touch. The community center erupted in confused conversations as 12 families approached me asking about refunds. Sarah Chen, who owns the local restaurant, offered to organize a real community discussion about lake access, one based on actual facts instead of fantasy. 3 residents mentioned that Brenda had been taking photos of their properties for insurance purposes, which sounded about as legitimate as her HOA presidency. But here's where things got really interesting. The next morning, I found surveyor stakes around my property with pending development ribbons fluttering in the breeze like surrender flags. A quick call to the county planning office revealed someone had filed a preliminary inquiry about subdividing my lakefront for a community recreational facility. Brenda wasn't just stealing fees anymore. She was planning to force the sale of my land through some kind of development scheme. The woman had gone from petty scam artist to full-blown property pirate. And honestly, I was almost impressed by her ambition. Almost. Certified mail arrived Friday morning, like a legal bomb wrapped in official packaging. The return address read North Shore Development Consultants, which sounded about as legitimate as Brenda's HOA credentials and contained a preliminary assessment notice that made my coffee taste like battery acid. The letter claimed my lake property was under review for community enhancement project and suggested I might benefit from partnering with local stakeholders rather than fighting inevitable development. For more updates, click the subscribe button and press the bell icon so you never miss an update. And don't forget to like and share.